The year 2014 marked a grim turning point in European history, shattering the illusion of lasting peace established after the fall of the Soviet Union. Under the leadership of Vladimir Putin, Russia launched a military campaign against Ukraine, annexing the Crimean Peninsula and igniting a separatist conflict in the eastern Donbas region. This marked the beginning of a protracted and devastating conflict that would escalate dramatically in 2022, plunging Europe into its worst security crisis since World War II. The Russia-Ukraine war is not merely a regional conflict, it represents a fundamental challenge to the rules-based international order established after 1945. Putin's actions, driven by a desire to restore Russia's perceived historical sphere of influence, have upended decades of relative stability in Europe. The conflict has exposed the fragility of international norms, the limits of diplomacy, and the devastating consequences of unchecked aggression. This essay will delve into the complex historical and geopolitical context of the Russia-Ukraine war, examining its key events, the motivations of the actors involved, and the wider implications for global security. By understanding the roots and trajectory of this conflict, we can better grasp its profound significance and the challenges it poses to the future of Europe and the international order. This conflict is a stark reminder of history's cyclical nature and the ever-present threat of violence. It underscores the importance of understanding the past, not just as a collection of events but as a source of valuable lessons for navigating the complexities of the present and preventing future tragedies. Only through a comprehensive understanding of the historical forces at play can we hope to find a path towards a just and lasting peace in Ukraine. To fully grasp the depth of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, one must delve into the long and intertwined history of the two nations. This shared past, marked by periods of both cooperation and bitter conflict, provides crucial context for understanding the events of 2014 and beyond. Ukraine, situated at the crossroads of East and West, has long been a battleground for competing empires and ideologies. From the 10th to the 13th centuries, the territory encompassing modern-day Ukraine formed a significant part of the Kievan Rus, a medieval East Slavic state. This shared heritage is often invoked by both Russians and Ukrainians to support their respective historical narratives. However, the Mongol invasions of the 13th century shattered the unity of the Kievan Rus, leading to centuries of separate historical trajectories for Russia and Ukraine. Ukraine, particularly its eastern and central regions, became increasingly integrated into the Russian Empire during the 17th and 18th centuries. This process intensified under Tsarist rule, with attempts to suppress Ukrainian language and culture in favor of Russian dominance. The 20th century brought about further turmoil, with Ukraine caught in the crossfire of revolutions, wars, and competing nationalisms. Following the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, Ukraine declared its independence, only to be drawn back into a brutal conflict that culminated in its forced incorporation into the Soviet Union as the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. The Soviet period was marked by periods of both Ukrainian cultural revival and harsh repression, most notably the Holodomor, a man-made famine engineered by Stalin's regime in the 1930s that killed millions of Ukrainians. This tragic history, often downplayed or denied in Russian narratives, continues to shape Ukrainian identity and fuels a deep-seated fear of Russian domination. Understanding these historical grievances is crucial for comprehending the Ukrainian people's fierce resistance to Russian aggression today. Following several months of pro-European protests in Kyiv, known as the Euromaidan Revolution, which led to the ousting of pro-Russian President Viktor Yanukovych in February 2014, Russia moved swiftly to exploit the ensuing instability in Ukraine. Exploiting the presence of Russian military forces already stationed in the Crimean Peninsula, due to a historical agreement allowing Russia to maintain a naval base in Sevastopol, Moscow orchestrated a rapid and bloodless takeover of the region. Masked Russian soldiers, later dubbed Little Green Men, fanned out across Crimea, seizing key infrastructure and government buildings. This swift military operation was accompanied by a carefully orchestrated propaganda campaign within Russia, portraying the intervention as a necessary measure to protect the rights of Russian-speaking populations in Crimea from alleged threats by Ukrainian ultranationalists. A hastily organized referendum, widely condemned by the international community as illegitimate, was held on March 16, 2014. The result, a reported 96.7% vote in favor of joining Russia, was highly disputed given the lack of independent observers and reports of voter intimidation. On March 18, Russia formally annexed Crimea, marking the first time since World War II that a European power had seized territory from another by force. This brazen act of aggression sent shockwaves through the international community, shattering the post-Cold War security architecture in Europe. The annexation of Crimea was immediately condemned by the United States, the European Union, and numerous other countries, leading to the imposition of sanctions against Russia and its expulsion from the G8 group of leading industrial nations. However, the crisis in Ukraine was far from over. The annexation of Crimea emboldened separatist movements in the eastern Donbas region of Ukraine, which also had a significant Russian-speaking population. With covert support from Russia in the form of weapons, funding, and military personnel, these separatists launched armed uprisings against the Ukrainian government, plunging eastern Ukraine into a protracted and bloody conflict. In an attempt to de-escalate the escalating conflict in eastern Ukraine, representatives from Ukraine, Russia, France, and Germany met in Minsk, Belarus, in September 2014. These talks resulted in the first Minsk Agreement, a fragile ceasefire agreement aimed at halting the fighting and finding a political solution to the conflict. The agreement called for a ceasefire, the withdrawal of heavy weaponry from the front lines, the release of hostages, and the granting of special status to the separatist-controlled regions of Donetsk and Luhansk. However, the agreement quickly unraveled, with both sides accusing each other of violating its terms. A second round of talks in Minsk in February 2015, attended by the leaders of Ukraine, Russia, France, and Germany, led to the signing of Minsk II. This agreement outlined a more detailed roadmap for peace, including a renewed ceasefire, the withdrawal of heavy weapons, constitutional reforms in Ukraine to grant greater autonomy to the Donbas region, and the holding of local elections. Despite initial hopes, Minsk II proved no more successful than its predecessor in bringing about a lasting peace. The ceasefire was routinely violated, with both sides accusing each other of shelling civilian areas and failing to withdraw heavy weaponry. The political provisions of the agreement, particularly the issue of special status for the Donbas, remained deeply contentious, with little progress made towards their implementation. The Minsk agreements, while well-intentioned, ultimately failed to resolve the fundamental issues at the heart of the conflict. They became a tool for managing, rather than resolving, the conflict, allowing Russia to maintain its influence in eastern Ukraine while avoiding further international censure. The failure of Minsk set the stage for the eventual resumption of large-scale hostilities in 2022. The period between the signing of the Minsk II agreement in 2015 and the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022 was characterized by a state of simmering conflict. While large-scale fighting subsided, the front lines in eastern Ukraine remained volatile, with sporadic clashes and shelling claiming the lives of soldiers and civilians alike. International attention to the conflict waned, with other global crises taking center stage. However, the underlying tensions remained unresolved. Russia continued to provide material and logistical support to the separatist republics in Donetsk and Luhansk, effectively maintaining control over these territories. Meanwhile, Ukraine, with the support of Western partners, sought to strengthen its military capabilities and bolster its defenses against further Russian aggression. The Ukrainian army underwent significant reforms and modernization efforts, receiving training and equipment from NATO countries, particularly the United States and the United Kingdom. However, the lack of a clear path towards a political solution and Russia's continued insistence on maintaining its influence in eastern Ukraine meant that the conflict remained a powder keg, awaiting a spark to ignite it once more. During these years, Russia also intensified its hybrid warfare tactics against Ukraine, employing a range of non-military measures to undermine the Ukrainian state and society. These included cyber attacks targeting critical infrastructure, disinformation campaigns aimed at sowing discord and undermining trust in the Ukrainian government, and economic pressure through trade restrictions and energy manipulation. On February 24, 2022, after months of military buildup and bellicose rhetoric, Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, shattering the fragile peace that had held since 2015. This marked a dramatic escalation of the conflict, transforming it from a localized conflict in the Donbas region into a Europe-wide security crisis. In the early hours of the morning, Russian forces launched a multi-pronged offensive, targeting key cities across Ukraine, including the capital Kyiv, Kharkiv in the northeast, and Odessa on the Black Sea coast. The invasion was accompanied by a barrage of missile strikes and airstrikes targeting military installations, infrastructure, and civilian areas. Putin, in a televised address to the nation, attempted to justify the invasion as a special military operation aimed at demilitarizing and denazifying Ukraine, a country with a Jewish president and no history of systematic Nazi ideology. This flimsy pretext was widely rejected by the international community as a baseless justification for an unprovoked act of aggression. The invasion sparked widespread international condemnation and outrage. The United Nations General Assembly overwhelmingly voted to condemn Russia's actions, demanding its immediate withdrawal from Ukraine. Western countries, led by the United States and the European Union, responded with unprecedented sanctions against Russia, targeting its financial system, energy sector, and key individuals close to Putin. The invasion, however, had miscalculated the Ukrainian people's resolve and the West's willingness to support Ukraine. Instead of a swift victory, Russia faced fierce resistance from Ukrainian forces and a united front of international condemnation. The invasion marked a turning point in the conflict, ushering in a new and even more dangerous phase.